This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Dwayne Bryant. He's a community leader. He works with law enforcement and at-risk youth, especially in the Memphis and Chicago, Delray Beach, Florida areas. This is one of those conversations that I have not had on this podcast. Very specifically, race in America. I would like to think that this is an original conversation. Not original to pat myself on the back or to pat Dwayne on the back, but original in the sense that you don't hear it. You don't hear the give and take. You don't hear the back and forth. Now, perhaps some people today might hear some propaganda from Dwayne. Perhaps they think they're hearing propaganda from me. Maybe, I'm not sure. Overall, I think it is a great give and take. Are there solutions? You be the judge. It's either on the table or you have to read between the lines. I'm not going to say I'm optimistic or pessimistic because the situation when it comes to race in America is an absolute mess. Without any further delay and without any further buildup from me, let's jump into a conversation today with Dwayne Bryant. Dwayne, one of the more interesting things that I did for myself, and you might laugh at this, I had never seen it. During assorted periods of time during COVID, during some writing in the last handful of years, while I was in Vietnam, I saw The Wire for the first time.
Oh, wow.
I had never seen it. I've watched the entire show at least 3 times now. You've got The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, The Wire. It's those 4. There's nothing else. It's a fantastic show. And look, I've been to Baltimore many times. I've seen Baltimore go in ways that makes me not want to go to a lot of parts of Baltimore. But The Wire is a fantastic show. I'm bringing all this up because I'm curious to hear your opinion on it as an opening segue into our conversation. How did you feel about The Wire?
Well, here's something. You're going to be shocked on this, Mike. I saw one episode of it. It was real. It was truthful. I believe they had to have gotten those storylines right from the streets. It was just so shockingly disappointing from all aspects, from the street aspect, from the politician aspect, from the police aspect, that I just did not continue to watch it as opposed to try to figure out how can I create better communities. But I do know it got many awards. Everyone was talking about it, and everyone was shocked that I did not continue to watch it. I think the reality of it is the reality that I was dealing with. Instead of looking at more of it, I was more interested in how do we change it? How do we make it better?
Look, you've talked to a lot of people, probably really interesting people that have seen it and know something about it. At least you would say, if I've seen that series, even though you've not seen it all, that at least it's a decent foundation for a guy from the suburbs in the DC area.
It's a decent foundation for a guy in the suburbs in the DC area for the current situation, because I think you can take The Wire and just superimpose it over 2022, and I think it would still be accurate from what I saw.
When I grew up in that DC area, at various points in time, DC was considered the murder capital of the world. The interesting thing was, though, for those of us that were living in the suburbs, go down and party in DC and teens and stuff like that, we would never see or never come in contact with the sections of DC and PG County, Maryland, et cetera, where people would say this is the murder capital. That was not part of the DC that I saw.
Well, in most cities, Chicago, even here in Delray for a small part, big cities, you have a city and then you have a city within the city. The crime, the drugs, the devastation, most people don't visit those parts. Like in Chicago right now, if you go to Chicago, and I tell everyone, hey, stay downtown, stay in the Loop area, you will have a fantastic visit. Go just 15 minutes south to Inglewood, 15 minutes west to the Austin neighborhood, you might have a whole different experience and have a whole different thought process of what Chicago is. You have that area of opulence, you have the Gold Coast, you have downtown where the city has poured the money into. Then you have the other neighborhoods where the city has literally have divested in, and therefore you have drugs, you have crime, you have schools that are closing, you have low performing areas where you have food deserts. Therefore, that crime now in Chicago is spreading downtown. Now everyone is saying, oh my God, we have a problem. I'm saying, hey, we had a problem 30 years ago. It didn't just start.
Yeah, for sure. Let me add one more piece of context about me, just so you have a handle on what I've seen in my life, even just to engage in this conversation, as we will over the next hour. Good family friend of my father's. They met working on a small project in my father's dental office. Gosh, I don't know, maybe close to 50 years ago. He was from Baltimore. He left Baltimore. He came to the suburbs in the DC area. I think he worked for the Fairfax County School Department for a while, but worked his way up, got to management position, got the college degree, all that kind of stuff. Ended up working closely with Joe Gibbs for a long time in one of his, I want to even say his ministry or whatnot. His daughter ended up becoming an attorney. Such a great story. And I remember asking him, and I'm not going to use his name here, but I remember asking him, I was like, hey, what about your family back in Baltimore? How do you rationalize this? How do you make sense of it? He didn't give a long story. It was kind of like, Mike, I had to leave. Nothing was happening there. I had to just leave. And he said, some people, they never changed. They just kept going down the path. I never really knew exactly what it would have been because it was all him. He didn't have any support system. Got married and have kids and all that stuff. We spent a lot of time together working on assorted houses and things. It's a fascinating story. I never really knew what it was about him individually that he made the choice, I must get away. Speak to me about your life so far. Was there anything similar to you in that type of situation? Or tell me something about your background.
Growing up, my mother and father were actually married when I was born. My father was a police officer, of all things, believe it or not. My dad left my mom at 2 years old because he was abusive. His nickname was Bull Bryant. That same excessive force that he used as a police officer, he carried that with him to the home. My mom divorced. He left her with 6 children. She worked 2 or 3 jobs, didn't have a lot of time for us as children, but she was really serious about education. She was serious about God. She was serious about going to school, getting an education, and becoming successful individuals. Me, I was the boy. I got put out of an elementary school. I wanted my dad there, but he was never there. Therefore, I misbehaved. I fought. I bullied. It wasn't until 9th grade that all of that tumultuous upbringing began to level out, and I began to really focus on the books, really desire college, never go to the drugs, because I think part of that, parents have a huge impact on where children will go and how far they go. Now, my cousins, I had cousins drinking. I had cousins smoking weed. My older sisters were out smoking weed. I just saw that as a life that I don't want. I saw that as a dead end. Things similar to your friend, at some point, you have to want it for yourself. You have to decide, I'm not going to be like my dad. I don't want to be in these streets. I want something better for myself. But you also have to be exposed to it to know that there is something better than these streets. So my mom would literally, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, Mike, but we used to have reel-to-reel film where you put a projector on a wall and she put a sheet up on the wall and we look at the pyramids of Egypt. We look at Jacques Cousteau. She look at National Geographic. She brings things home from work. I always was like, wow, this world is a huge place. It's way bigger than Eatonville, Florida. I want to explore the world. So even as a child, she was able to unlock the unknown and make me want to desire to do it. To this day, I'm a certified scuba diver. To this day, I've been to Egypt and been to the pyramids. Parents have to instill that sense of wonder, that sense of exploration, that sense of, I want something better than my current state.
Well, let me take it to some statistics that I'm looking at in front of me. I don't know how you're going to define yourself. I mean, maybe anybody that's successful is ultimately the exception to the rule, because I know plenty of people that grow up in the suburbs, cruise through life on autopilot because they can. There's not really any success there. They just cruise through. For our conversation today, you're speaking about education, you're speaking about yourself, and you're a very well-spoken guy. I'm looking at two headlines in front of me talking about 60 Illinois schools, 0 students proficient in either math or reading, 23 Baltimore schools, 0 students proficient in math. Speak to that and you. What's the disconnect there? Do you want to go back even a little further on your story before we get into perhaps why other people have not gone the path that you've gone? Was there a moment? Was there an individual? Was there a book? What was it? Was it just your mom? What was it that was driving you? Was there a moment, or was it just a group of things that kept unfolding as a young man to push you down the path?
I will say the answer is all of the above. For instance, literally yesterday, Mike, I was on the south side of Chicago doing a workshop with 3rd through 5th grade males and then 6th through 8th grade males. Then that evening, I had a workshop with the parents. I asked the boys, raise your hand if you play video games. 95% of the hands went up. Okay, raise your hands if you play more than 1 hour of video games. 90% of the hands are still up. Raise your hand if you play more than 2 hours per night of video games. 90% of the hands were up. I went up to 4 hours. 80% of the hands were still up. I went up to 5 hours. 75% of the hands were still up that they play at least 5 hours of video games. Then I asked, what are you playing? Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto, Madden, 2K. Our young boys are allowed, and sometimes girls, to play hours of video games. And then I shared with the parents, according to Nielsen, African Americans consume 7 hours and 12 minutes of media per day. Whites at 5 hours and 2 minutes of media. Hispanics at 6 hours and 30 minutes of media. I began to just have a conversation with parents. Listen, you allowing your children to play this much video game, violent video games, listening to trap music, listening to things that are not going to help them. This is not a government program. This is a parent problem. Part of the situation is, Mike, and I always say the foundation is the home. When you look at a school where 0% of the children are performing, that means 0% of the parents are fully engaged and actively engaged in their children's academics. Now, the parents may disagree, but I say follow them home, look at what's actually going on, and you can see exactly why the results are what they are. Now, the other thing is, in addition to having quality, solid parents, you also have to have an extended community. There were people in our community, Mr. Harmon, he was a police officer coach, and he really spoke to us about staying out of trouble, stop fighting, stop bullying. So it takes more than just parents, because after a while, you get tired of hearing your parents' voice. So you must have other people within the neighborhood and the community. In your lower performing schools, teachers won't like this either, but oftentimes the worst teachers are in those lower performing schools. Your higher performing schools, the standards are so high, the teachers who are there would never teach in those lower performing schools. And some of those teachers who are in the lower performing schools will not even qualify to teach at some of your higher proficiency schools.
Let me keep it at the word that you've used several times already, which is parents. I think I know the exact statistics, but I'm not sure. If I was to contrast Black, white, Asians in America, two-parent household, they're quite dramatically different. If we are at a situation where to get to education, to get the kids going in the right direction, tell me, I mean, I don't know. I'm a curious white guy who's living in Asia. Tell me, what is going wrong in terms of the relationship part between men and women in the Black community? What's going wrong? Has the belief in marriage disappeared? What is going wrong?
That is a beautiful question, Mike. You're more than just the white guy. You're an intelligent white guy who has a heart to understand, and you're intelligent enough to understand data and facts. Let me throw some data and facts out there. President Nixon, 1969 to 1974, he had a campaign. It was called the War on Drugs. His senior staff members say it in the newspaper. I forget which paper, but I have it. It said that, quote unquote, the 1968 Nixon White House war on drugs was really an anti-war against the left, meaning hippies, and Black people. Here you have this war on drugs where the president of the United States is unleashing several police authorities of we're going to start locking up hippies and we're going to lock up Black people. That's one. Take a look at around the 70s. There were only about 300,000 men in prison, 300,000. Then we go to Ronald Reagan, 1982. He doubles down on the war on drugs. This is a time where we have this war in, I believe it's Sandinistas and the Contras. According to a June 6, 2011 article, USA Today, the CIA was funneling drugs into poor neighborhoods. So here's the government, the most powerful government on the planet, funneling drugs through poor, Black mostly, and some brown communities. The government is saying we're going to have a war on drugs and we're going to start locking these people up, the majority of which are Black men. Then we have in 1994, Bill Clinton, who some Black folks said he was the first Black president. I do not give him that pass.
Kind of looked white to me. A simple guy.
I think when he played the saxophone on Arsenio Hall, people just fell in love with him and he had a swag about him. But he tripled down on this war on drugs. Look at the 70s, 300,000 people in prison. Late 90s, 2000, 2 million people in prison. Black men were disproportionately arrested. They were disproportionately taken out of the homes. There's this other thing that the government did. They said, hey, we're going to give you welfare. And in order to get this welfare, you cannot have a man in the home. You cannot be married. You cannot have two incomes. So you must be a single woman. We're going to send people around the homes to make sure that there is no man there.
Explain that a little bit more for me, just so I understand.
Sure. The government says we want to raise our communities, so we're going to give welfare. We're going to give food assistance. We're going to give housing assistance. But in order to do this, you must have a certain income level. That income level does not help if you have dual incomes. Now, here's what's interesting, though. The face of the welfare mother in America, we always put the Black woman as the face, but the facts are there are more white women on welfare than there are Black women. However, when we want to demonize a thing, we always put the Black face on it to say, hey, look what's going on.
I'm guessing the percentages, though, absolute numbers on white mothers, okay. But in terms of percentages, Black mothers, it's probably much higher.
Higher percentage. That's absolutely correct. Therefore, you have a trifecta. You have this war on drugs. Black men are being taken out of the homes left and right. But here's what's crazy. Get this. According to the FBI data numbers, Black people use drugs less than whites. Black people sell drugs at the same rate as whites. However, Black people are 6.5 times more likely to be incarcerated for drugs than whites. If you're just looking at numbers, we got a pretty interesting soup that's being mixed. And this soup is about we must get the Black man out of the home. We arrest them. We don't invest in neighborhoods. So therefore, they go to sell drugs. Now, when the father's out of the home, the boy's misbehaving. He doesn't care about academics. He has to help the mom put food on the table. So now he goes into a life of drugs. Now we have 3 strikes and you're out. Now we have 2 million men in prison. They're unproductive. They're not learning. They're not being rehabilitated. Now we went in the 60s, Mike, where 65 to 70% of Black men were in the home to 25% of Black men are in the home.
I had an economist on this podcast several times, a guy named Walter Williams at a George Mason University, Black economist, and he made this same case about the change in the family in the Black community. I do want to add a statistic, though, that my audience would probably get on me, and I tried to prepare a little bit here for you. To take it back in time even a little bit further, I'm looking at a Time magazine from 1958. At that point in time, Black men, 10% of the population, Black community, but 60% of arrests for crimes involving violence, bodily harm, murder, etc. Yes, there's no doubt that starting with LBJ and the Great Society, saying, hey, we need to change things. People can have all kinds of arguments about whether or not all the Great Society money, as you make the case about forcing people to not have a family, or essentially incentivizing people to not have a family. A government incentivizing to not have a family is just obviously terrible. But speak to the idea, though, that perhaps some of the violence didn't just originate in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And these were FBI stats I was citing. I think some people might say, hey, we've had a problem for a long time.
Okay, if we go into history, which I love, absolutely love, then let's go all the way back to 1619 when European travelers saw this great, powerful African labor, decided let's bring them to America. Let's strip them of their language. Let's strip them of their God. Let's strip them of their culture. Let's beat them. Let's rape them. Let's give them no human rights. As a matter of fact, they're worse than animals. We're going to do this for 256 years. Now, all of the trauma-informed practices are talking about PTSD. We talked about some of the Vietnam soldiers who are still having PTSD when they hear loud explosions. Now there's a new field of study in neuroscience of epigenetics that trauma is transformed through generations, and it also alters your DNA and your molecular structure. Let's look at 256 years of chattel slavery, 99 years of Black codes, another probably 80 some years of Jim Crow. America literally taught, stripped, dehumanized Africans, enslaved Africans for centuries. Then we had the 13th Amendment that said, hey guys, you're free now. You can leave the plantations, but where were they going? Nowhere. Then we had Black codes that doubled down and said, hey, if you don't have a job, we're going to put you in chain gangs. Hey, if you look at a white person, we're going to put you in the chain gangs. Hey, if you're a criminal in any way, I would say since we're going before 1958, which that's a fair statement, then we cannot be void of the fact that what happened to Africans in America or enslaved Africans in America, because the Africans who come here today, like from Nigeria, the majority of the Black doctors are African, not from America. We have to look at, if we're going to look at it holistically, the impact of devastating a community without any level of repair. There's never been repair. If we say welfare is repair, it's really not. It's just saying, we'll give you enough money so you can live, so you don't steal and rob and kill other people. If we have that debate before the 1960s, then I say, let's just jump a couple of few centuries and look at what happened, even with police.
I think that's a fair, factual statements that you just made. I think the issue then becomes, this is what I hope with this conversation, and there's some other areas that we're going to go into. I think the interesting thing then becomes, for me, is listening to you, it comes back to you. I'll share something with you since you brought up the Vietnam War. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You know where I am. I'm in a country that before I came here, look, I grew up in the DC area, so I knew there was 58,000 Americans on that black wall, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial down in DC. I knew that's how many was on there. Get to Vietnam and you're like, I didn't know we killed 4 million people. Is it a war when we lose 58,000 and they lose 4 million? The fascinating thing also, just to share with you and the audience, to be in Vietnam for the time that I have.
Did you say 4 million, Mike?
4 million, yes. 4 million.
Wow.
Yeah. I've not seen any violence here in Vietnam in 10 years. None. Zero. I don't see anything on the street. The tent cities across America, I've seen the pictures are racially mixed. So that's a whole different issue. But I've never seen anything like that here. There's very high wealth here. There's billionaires here and all that kind of stuff. And there's no safety net at all. Zero safety net. On top of that, America didn't make it easy for Vietnam after the war either. And still, it's very hard for Vietnamese to even travel because their passports are not accepted as much. It's amazing the resilience in the face of more bombs were dropped on Vietnam during that war than we dropped in all of Europe and Asia during World War II. I almost want to make the connection. You probably weren't expecting this before we started talking, but I almost want to make the connection between the resilience of the Vietnamese and the resilience of you. The Vietnamese either figure out a way to thrive or there's nothing. There's no safety nets. It's a hustle, get educated, or that's it. I bring it back to you. You remind me with your attitude of what I see in the Vietnamese all the time.
There's another factor, though, that I think that, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, this might be the missing element. The similarities with the Vietnamese and myself is they have a culture that's intact, meaning they know who they are. They knew who they were before Americans came to invade their land.
Fair point. Several thousand-year-old culture, yes.
Absolutely. Their language was intact. Their respect for community was intact. Now, when America came there, America does what Americans do wherever it goes. They try to conquer and divide. Then they leave destruction in the midst. Now you have North Vietnam fighting South Vietnam. These guys are cousins. These guys are brothers. Why are they fighting each other for a foreign power? It makes absolutely no sense.
We have to blame the French ultimately for sticking their nose in here, and then America coming in to do whatever we were doing here, which I have no earthly idea what we were doing here, really.
And you know what? Since you said the French now, I love intelligent people, Mike. Now let's jump for a second to Rwanda, because the French also had their hands in Rwanda and the Belgium. So here you are, people who've been living in peace for thousands of years. Then you have these outside invading forces who divide the people. We had some of the worst genocide in Rwanda that the world has known. The French left, the Belgium left, and then people began to kill each other. Now Rwanda is one of the most fastest developing African countries, peaceful, low crime, because they were able to remember who they were. Their culture was still intact, even though they had some years of foreign invasion. Blacks in America, their culture was totally devastated. If it wasn't for my mom, who always taught the value of history, we used to watch Eyes on the Prize. We watched everything civil rights, everything Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, etc. I can say some of my peers did not have that. I had another teacher named Ms. Barbara Bay. She taught world history from an Afrocentric perspective. And she told me, little black boy, the reason why you're acting the way you do is because you don't know who you are. I'm going to teach you not 1619, but I'm going to go back 100,000 years before that, when your ancestors were in Africa building pyramids, building temples. And I was like, wait, what? Are you telling me that my ancestors were not just slaves? Honestly, Mike, I think the biggest problem we have in America, and this may make me sound really bad, is that the slaves that were created 16, 17, 1800s are still existing today, even though the Emancipation Proclamation has been declared. When Black people are killing themselves, crime at high levels, disrespecting authority, not even working productively, those are still enslaved Africans who now have been emancipated.
I think that is a perfectly fair argument to make. I think actually a lot of people would agree with you. Then the real issue becomes is we accept a lot of the foundations that we're both talking about, the various historical points. That still brings me back to you. You made choices. My friend made choices that I told you about earlier. Other people are making other choices.
We were equipped with better information, better support systems, better ideas of self. Imagine your dad is a gangster disciples, Peace Stone Ranger. You have generations who are gangsters, who are drug dealers, who are gang lords. Therefore, you are expected into that culture. It's what's expected of you. They're not saying, hey, we're going to send you to college. Hey, learn your history. No, you have to be the biggest and the baddest in order to survive. Therefore, if that's what you breed, that's what you learn, that's what you become. Fortunately for me, I'm going to be honest with you, Mike, and this is what I know about me. I'm not that exceptional, but what I am is whatever environment I'm in, I'm going to learn it and master it. If my father was a gangster, if my uncles and cousins were in my home and in my family, I would have wanted to be Nino Brown in New Jack City. I know if you know The Wire, you know New Jack City before The Wire. I would have wanted to be that character because my personality is one, no matter what, I want to win. It just so happened to be I had a better petri dish of ingredients to make me want success and not harm people, to do better in society, to love humanity, to love all people, to advance my community versus the other side. It's exposure. I had way more exposure, a mother and a community who cared about me and who saw I was smart enough and they challenged me.
You make a great case. I grew up in this community called Vienna, Virginia, 15 miles outside DC. There's a big mall near there called Tyson's Corner Mall. They recently connected the DC Metro to Tyson's Corner Mall. Vienna, Virginia, as you could probably guess by the way I've described it, was probably very high percentage white, boring suburbs, okay? Typical stuff. zero crime, whatever. To go back now and to see all the homes are assessed at $1.5 million, there's rampant crime now. I say to myself, okay, Dwayne makes a historical argument that is sound. When do we stop? What's the pivot? When do we get out of the hole? Because it looks like to me that perhaps starting with the Great Society, it seems like every statistic and metric surrounding the Black community in America has gone in the wrong direction. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think it's fair based on the stats that you look at. Let me offer a couple of glimmer of hopes. Have you heard of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street?
No.
Oh, you're a finance guy, so you got to do your homework on this one, Mike, because you'll be very impressed. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, there were more Black businesses, Black banks, Black theaters, Black grocery stores. This was a community where Black folks said, hey, shortly thereafter slavery, we want to pool our resources. We want to build a community together. And I know as I'm speaking, you're probably Googling it right now.
Basically, people came together to try to build a community. And I'm guessing things went the wrong direction at some stage.
That's exactly right. So in 1921, this is way before the 50s, way before the other stats that we're talking about, but it's still after slavery. The white community, nearby community, was very angry, very jealous, because they were like, who do these Black people think they are? Who do they think they are that they have the audacity to look down on us? There are several other communities in America, Mike, in Atlanta, in Chicago, in Houston, where Black communities were literally destroyed by white mobs of people because they did not like the progression. So in our country, we have many examples of Black excellence. For some reason, white folk didn't like that. They went and literally burned this town down. They had airplanes dropping bombs on the town. There's some movies about it. There's lots of documentaries about it.
To push back a little bit, if we bring ourselves to modern times right now, I mean, I'm sure that there is a lot of wealth in Black communities in a place like Atlanta. I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone to college, etc. Again, I'm still at that pivot point. Let me shift you for a second. Just something that's a touch, I don't really think it's controversial, but I think it's interesting to me. And I wrote this down. I was going to make it as an opening question.
I don't mind controversy.
Well, I think this question or what I'm going to raise could ultimately is not really about Black or white, but what I'm going to raise perhaps doesn't help the Black-white situation in America. Everyone in, I'm not going to say everyone, a lot of people in Vietnam know about George Floyd.
Oh, yeah. 60 countries around the world protested for George Floyd who don't know anything about it.
Let me add a little to that, though. People in Vietnam know about George Floyd. Nobody in Vietnam knows about what just happened in Memphis with the young guy recently. We all know there weren't any riots. The media coverage came and went, the quick news cycle. I'm curious what your perspective is about the media, because to me, that looks like a political media combination of things. If we're going to isolate and focus on the white cop killing George Floyd, but then the other situation just gets pushed aside, and heck, I'll bet most Americans, because there wasn't a tremendous amount of attention on it and it's gone away and no one knows his name. You will know his name, but vast majority of people don't. What do you think about that, though, in terms of the media coverage? Because that sure looks political to me.
We have to look at the totality. So George Floyd was in the height of a global pandemic. Everyone had to be away from their jobs. They had to pretty much be at home. They were being in tune to media. It was like a level of global consciousness that we had never seen before.
But that global consciousness was coming through the screens, and somebody was making those screens show the message of George Floyd 24/7 and not making the Memphis story 24/7.
I'm getting there. I'll try to move a little faster. Mike, like, come on, baby, get to it, goddammit. One, yes, you have the dynamic of the white cop just kneeling on Floyd's neck. You had the world tuning in, Japan, China. What do they care about George Floyd? Probably absolutely nothing. For some reason, and I can't honestly explain it, Mike, how 60 countries protesting for a man who they don't even know his culture or anything. I don't fully understand that.
Stop for 1 second before you get to the Memphis part. We know how it happened. I can flip on CNN here in Vietnam. You can flip on CNN anywhere. If CNN is running it 24/7, the whole world's going to know. And that's what happened.
Yep. Yeah.
It was selective. As you lay this whole foundation in this conversation, you say, hey.
I got it, Mike. Wait, I got it. With George Floyd, not only did you have the killing of George Floyd, but you had the burning down of police stations. You had Portland, Oregon, who literally protested for an entire year, burning things down, challenging the police, going head to head.
Why? Why did they do it and not around Memphis? I just argue that's politics and media hand in hand.
No, I think in Memphis, what happened there, first you had black cops, and this is not justifying the police in any way at all. You had black cops beating the heck out of a black man and killed him. Now, here's what's interesting. Coincidentally enough, I work in Memphis. I have a program in Memphis where I'm working with incarcerated kids. These babies are locked up, 14, 15, 16-year-old. Some have first-degree murder charges. I asked them the same question you said. I said, let me ask you this question. When George Floyd was killed, people around the whole world protested, tore up. Why didn't it happen in Memphis? Because I was waiting for a reaction. Do you know what they told me? They said, Mr. Bryant, this is an everyday story. We're so used to the Memphis cops beating the hell out of folk. What would we riot for? I mean, we had Martin Luther King who assassinated here. Why would we write about something that happens every single day? To your point, it was a non-story because even in the Memphis, with the Memphians, it was a non-story to them.
That's an interesting observation because if I follow through the logic, and I have seen the numbers, look, I understand there can be other acts of violence and there can be other acts of brutality. The sheer numbers of white cops killing black guys is extremely rare. I wonder if the young men that were giving you that response were essentially saying, well, hold on, it's more rare to see that situation, whereas the black cops beating up the black guys is more common. I want to make sure I understand.
Let me make sure we're specific. Memphis is a black city. I think 60+% of Memphis is black, which is one of the blackest cities in America. What the young men were telling me is that it's not strange to see a black cop beating up on a black person. What was a little more strange is that they actually killed him. But to see the whooping, as we would call it, the whooping, that wasn't strange at all, which is why there was no protest. I mean, there may have been some demonstration, but most of it was peaceful. The difference in George Floyd was you had chaos in cities across America. That was the story.
This is what I'm trying to get at, though, is that chaos can't happen unless the George Floyd story is on CNN 24/7, all the channels 24/7. And my point is that for some reason, the decision makers, whether it's DC, New York, whatnot, that control the screens, decided we're going to press the button on the George Floyd story, but we're not going to press the button on the Memphis story. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's semi-fair. With George Floyd, you had natural riots. I'm talking about straight up riots.
Let me keep pushing you. If the George Floyd story was not 24/7 on CNN, why would the hippie white kids start rioting? People are people. If you tell people this awful thing happened and they see it nonstop, I just don't know why they didn't riot after Memphis. That's what I don't get.
I don't know if I'm not explaining it clearly. And I hear what you're saying. George Floyd had more media coverage because of the violence and the devastation that happened after the murder. Because in Memphis, there was no violence and devastation. There was no more news coverage.
Why? Why was there a difference? That's what I'm driving at.
That's what I'm telling you, because the violence wasn't there. Had the violence been there, the news would have been there covering it because the news loves sensationalism. The news loved the violence and the destruction.
You and I know for America to ever have a hope of getting to some sense of normalcy and whatever and some cohesion, that people like me and you, a white guy and a black guy, we've got to have this conversation. We've got to have this conversation. I just think that if I look at the quote white community, the white community instantly, rightly or wrongly, and some people are going to say they're wrong and some people are going to say they're right, they're going to instantly say, oh man, okay, Orange Man Bad was the president. The media is controlled by the left. We have this situation.
Unless you watch Fox.
Overall, except for Fox, overall, the media is controlled by the left. You say Orange Man Bad's the president. You have a situation, a black-white situation there in Minnesota. White guy kills black guy. Boom, buttons pressed. Then I think white America looks back and says, well, hold on. Why no riots after Memphis? Then they look around and say, well, hold on, who's the president now? I think this is part of the conversation. All these pieces have got to be thrown on the table, because how do people ever have a conversation like you and I are having if they can't trust the basics? Here's what I'm really driving at. Is it that you and I really disagree? Is it the average white and black person really disagree? Or is there a machinery beyond our purview that stirs the pot? Is there something that stirs the pot that keeps us all on edge more so than we need to be?
Abso-freaking-lutely. That freaking machinery is the same machinery from the 1619s that said, hey, white guys, even though you're poor as hell and you're an indentured servant and you're just like that black slave over there, you're better than that colored fella. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to make you the landlord, the overseer. I'm going to make you the police. We're going to create systems that's going to be designed to make sure you have an advantage. And even Lyndon B. Johnson said, if you can convince the poorest white guy that he's better than the best black guy, you can pick his pockets. Yes, there is a system. There is a elite structure that has to have white people feeling as though we are better because we are white. That's the only thing that makes us better. That system has been in place. Those, as you call it, puppet masters have been here for centuries. And unfortunately, people like you and I, we haven't gotten together because there's money to be made in division. There's money to be made with keeping people in silos, but we haven't gotten together to say, listen, man, our nation is crumbling. China's getting stronger. They're unified. A divided house cannot stand. We have got to say, okay, Black America, white America, let's put aside this bull crap that's been going on for centuries. We have to build this nation together, or else we're going to be suffering really bad, really soon.
That's a fair assessment. China's an interesting situation to bring up because the Chinese probably believe, from a racial perspective, they're number one. I think it's not uncommon as you are talking to a guy. Now, of course, it's different than black and white America. You're talking to a guy who's, I don't have any disadvantages staying in Vietnam, but I am somebody who's minority in an all Asian country for a long time. I quite enjoy it. Maybe I'm a little different bird, so to speak. But it is interesting that we sometimes forget, especially when we think about history. I'm 50% Lithuanian. My father's still 100%. Some small Baltic country in Europe. They came over in the early 1900s. I think it was his grandfather who ended up in a coal mine in Scranton, Pennsylvania, I mean. Racial groups are interesting. And I find it living over here. It's, if I go to Singapore, Singapore's based on 3 racial groups. If I go to Malaysia, it's 1 racial group. If I go to Thailand, it's 1 racial group, mostly 1 racial group in Thailand. If I go to Myanmar, formerly Burma, I can't count the number of racial groups. If I go to China, it's 1 racial group. If I go to Japan, 1 racial group. Korea, 1 racial group. Philippines, a little more mixed. Vietnam, there are actually a lot of minority racial groups in Vietnam, Asian minority racial groups in Vietnam, but they pretty much very nationalistic, very much believe we're Vietnamese. It's an interesting thing when you start to bring up different groups and whatnot. And I want to bring up a name also to let you run with it as well and run with what I just said. You mentioned Malcolm X earlier. I find any times that I've seen clips from Malcolm X, I'm always like, God, that was one smart guy. It would have been interesting to see for the 2 black leaders that were killed in the 60s. It would have been interesting to see over time what would have happened if they both lived. My observation, it sure seems like Malcolm X was the guy that the establishment was deathly afraid of.
Absolutely. No question. They were afraid of him because he didn't care to follow the rules. First of all, Malcolm X, before he was Malcolm X, was Malcolm Little, who was a criminal. He was caught up in the criminal justice system for petty theft, crime, etc. Went to prison. That's when he discovered Islam, Elijah Muhammad, etc. He was more of black people need to be with black people our own neighborhoods and our own communities, building wealth for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. Similar to the Tulsa, Oklahoma Black Wall Street Project.
How do you feel about that?
I'm mixed, to be honest with you. I believe that during the time of segregation, in one Black neighborhood, you would see a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, a drug dealer, and a pimp. Little boy growing up, he has 5 men to choose from. He has a 20% option. Today, in many inner city Black neighborhoods, you got the pimp, you got the preacher, you got the drug dealer, and you might have a school teacher. Now, 4 out of 5 of your options is probably something negative. Chances are your ability to emulate what you see is going to be something negative. So I do believe that if Black people are left alone, this system that's designed to destroy us will just leave us alone. I believe we will prosper. I believe the neighborhoods like Tulsa, Oklahoma, independent Black, well, when you mention Atlanta, also Houston, I believe we'll see Black neighborhoods prospering. And I believe that's what white people really want. But a part of me believes some white people don't want to see Black people prospering.
I've never met those white people, to be honest with you. I've never met those white people. I really haven't. Honestly, most people are too busy with whatever they're doing.
With their own stuff.
Right. I think the real issue that comes down, if I was to observe white America just looks at it and says, man, we're spending a lot of money on welfare. Man, the violence unnerves me. I find it's that simple. It's kind of like, hey, if that violence would just go away and some of the welfare would go away and there'd be more of what you're discussing, some of the economic development, I think they'd be fine. I don't know if they'd be fine, but I don't think we'd have the strife.
Yeah, I think that it's easy to say if it just goes away when it has been systemically and systematically structured and layered and piled on. It's easy if you're not the victim of those centuries of destruction and devastation. It's easy to say, hey, guys, get over it. Just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But what if you had no boots, no straps, no shoes, no laces, no leather on your feet, just bare feet on the hard ground? America is one of the greatest countries in this world. In my opinion, no question, no doubt. The opportunities here are vast. But I think that America hasn't been as equitable in terms of the access to that. Even though it was there, equality of the access wasn't necessarily there. But I do believe that it's time to stop making excuses. It's time to say, listen.
The personal responsibility message.
Oh, absolutely. That's what Malcolm X was about. He was 100% about personal responsibility, understanding your culture, your nature, your God, pull your economics together, learn and grow, build your community, stop killing one another. Let's build a nation. He was about that life. He and Martin Luther King had the J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, COINTELPRO, hadn't targeted both to assassinate them, it would have been a different kind of America. And I think after some of the 60s assassinations, I think, honestly, Black people just got tired. We're like, no matter where we go, they're killing us. Hope probably decreased. What do? We're fighting against a government who's way more powerful than what we are. How can we win this thing?
I should add on the assassinations, also considering the country that I'm in, and there were some documents that came out in December of 2022, finally released after all these years. The CIA actually knew something about Oswald. Wait another couple decades to tell us exactly what happened. Yeah, there was 2 Kennedys that were off in that decade as well. And you wonder, it was a really interesting decade. Can I ask you a question? How often do you hear this conversation that you and I are having between a white guy and a Black guy? I don't ever hear it, ever.
I hear it this morning talking to you.
I mean, I've done these interviews for a long time, so I feel like I know how to be fair and make everyone feel like they're getting a chance to say their piece. But how do you feel about a conversation like this? Because I got to tell you, not hesitancy, but I didn't listen to your voice or listen to your tone before I got on the call with you. So I'm curious to how you feel a conversation like this is gone. How do you feel other Black Americans would feel about this conversation?
Some would say, hey, it was a great conversation. Some would say, hey, I'm selling out because I'm laughing with you, because I'm agreeing with you, because I'm respecting you. I think some white folk would say, hey, we need more of this. I think some white folk would say, hey, what about this? What about that? There are people who prefer division because their pain bodies, their hurt, their trauma is so great that having peace and building a nation is less important than their trauma. I think a couple of things, Mike. Before I met you, I did some research on you. What I did is what many Blacks and whites don't do is have a fundamental respect for your humanity. I looked at your Broke movie. I'm like, whoa, this dude is really on it. I looked a little bit on your Wikipedia. I understood that you lived in Vietnam. I understood that you're a major player in the financial markets. I understand that you're a very intelligent man. My first thing was, because someone said, hey, he's a conservative and blah, 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 blah. I said, I don't care about that. He's a human being. He's a man who's educated, who's intelligent. And for what I researched, he believes in facts. Therefore, he won't be stuck on a stupid opinion just because he's trying to cater to a particular base. When we met and I conveyed that to you, I think you saw my humanity as well. Once we can look at each other and deal with each other on a human being level, that stupidity, that foolishness, it will go away. But it is going to take intelligent men like yourself, like myself, to say, hey, guys, we got to start having these conversations. Let's put down the guns. Let's put down the axes. Let's understand history happened, but we learn from it. We don't have to beat each other over the heads with it. The Civil War was fought and lost and won. Let's deal with that. So we're not trying to raise the South again, and let's raise America. That's where we better be, because America is beginning to see some things that if she does not change course, we will not be where we are on the world stage.
Let me follow up, though, something you said. My father from Pennsylvania, my mother from Southern Virginia, going down to the Tidewater area a lot during my life, I would see Black America in the Tidewater area. I went to school in Tallahassee. I went to FSU for grad school. I remember I took a long drive through Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, down into Texas one time. I ended up working there for a summer. It's very different in the North and the South. I think sometimes in the modern age, does the South get a little bit of a bad rap? I don't know if I think all Southern guys are just ready to start up something from 200 years ago. I don't know if I perceive that. This is going to sound crazy because I've known a lot of Southern guys in my life. I don't think the Southern guys that necessarily even have the Confederate flag are like anti-Black. It's more like they're just rednecks. I think sometimes we get all caught up in the symbolism and everything. Look, you grew up in the South. But if I went to Chicago, like you said, or certain parts of New York, speak to me about the contrast between North and South today from your perspective.
I will say this, because now I am between Chicago, Florida, and Memphis. Every week I'm in one of those cities. I can say the people in Memphis, Mike, have been some of the kindest. And I think that's why they didn't blow up like George Floyd. Some of the sweetest, loving, kindest people. When I'm walking, because I like exercising outside. I see white folk, they smile and say, how you doing? The Black folk say the same thing.
In the South, right?
In the South, absolutely, in the South. I have not had a problem with a white person or a Black person in the South, in Tennessee, but I am not ignorant to the history. I'm not ignorant to, there may still be elements here and there. I think that one thing I like about the South, if someone is a racist, they're going to let you know. I don't like your Black, well, I'm going to say something I can't say on live.
That cuts both ways, though, too, right? That cuts both ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In the North, if they don't like you, they're going to use microaggressions. They're going to figure out a way to take you out of the job, to eliminate your source of income and all of this other stuff. Personally, and every other Black person I know, we prefer the real racists to tell you what they're thinking up front so you know where you stand versus the covert ones. I still believe, obviously, clearly, racism is alive and well. When we look at domestic terrorism, when we look at hate crimes, it's increasing. So we know it is there. I will never pretend like it's not. But I do believe, I don't see that the Southern place is just so terrible and the Northern is so wonderful. The liberal, as Malcolm X said, is just as bad as the one who doesn't profess to be liberal.
You just brought up something, and I should give the rejoinder because I'm sure there's people going to be out there saying, hey, Mike, why did you not mention that? You just brought up the notion of hate crimes and domestic violence, various violence towards Black people in America. I don't know the exact numbers. I'm sure there's some numbers for sure, 100%. I don't know what they are. Maybe you do know, but I don't know. But how do you feel when you say that, you observe that, you know that as a Black man in America, you believe that, and then maybe some white America is circumspect, and maybe they're circumspect because, for example, they watched what happened with Jussie Smollett in Chicago. It becomes a really tricky mess in America that when you very well have a situation that exists, but then maybe there's people that want that situation to be bigger than it is. Imagine right now you're speaking to a conservative, Republican, suburban couple. They're like, oh my gosh, another story about hate crimes. I just watched the thing with Jussie Smollett.
Here's what's interesting. So I was in Chicago when Jussie Smollett thing happened. I was talking to a friend of mine in St. Louis, and she was like, man, what are we going to do? I said, time out. I said, nobody here believes that crap. She was like, what are you talking about? It's all over the news. I said, listen, have you been to Chicago doing a freaking polar vortex? It's 20 freaking below zero. Who in the hell in their right mind is outside looking for Subway? It makes no sense. Then he walks around and there's a noose tied around his neck. He didn't take the noose off. He walked around with it. I said, any Black man in his right mind, if he's a real Black man, if there's a noose, the first thing he's trying to do is to get that piece of crap off of his neck, to fight, to kick, to scream, to what? I said, we don't believe it. It's crap. That's why some Black people were enraged, but those who were in tune were like, this little boy wants attention, and he's trying to create and stoke the flames of racism or whatever it is because his little self wants attention. We're not going to give this little boy who's trying to be a man some attention, so it's not going to happen like that. It does not mean there is no hate crimes, but in that situation, I think he was worse or just as bad as the people who are creating the hate crimes because it's almost intentionally trying to get people to support him through race. That's a shame on America that race baiting is so freaking easy because we've made it that way for centuries.
It's way too easy. I'm going to bring something up. Also, you said something about the person that connected us, mentioned that they said, well, Mike, he's conservative. And I got to tell you, the longer I'm in Asia, I like to think of myself almost as traditional. The reason I bring that up is because the labels in America, I don't know what these labels mean. I seriously doubt, and I haven't asked you, and maybe you're going to surprise me, but I seriously doubt that you believe a lot of the, quote, woke agenda these days, the stuff that they might make fun of on South Park, a guy saying he can have a baby, all these kinds of things. I don't think most of Black America is a part of that because most of Black America, very Christian in the South and whatnot. Another piece of interesting analysis here. How do you look at this politically? Because it seems like a lot of the white folks on the left, even though they might be grouped with a lot of Black America, but a lot of the white folks on the left seem like they're on their own chase to, I don't know what, very different than perhaps Black America, even though they're in the same voting camp.
I think when we say woke, there's different departments. Let's say if woke is a shopping mall, then you have different departments. And what's happening is some departments that the general Black population is not in favor of, they're trying to make you take everything in order to put it under one shopping mall.
That was my point. Now, you said it better than me.
Absolutely. So, for instance, Ron DeSantis here in Florida, he's the governor, one of the most proponent anti-woke folk, et cetera. There's a big controversy about AP Black history. When I first heard it, I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. It was advanced history that got me to stop fighting, that got me to understand who I was as a person, a human being, a Black man, my culture, my history. I'm absolutely not in favor of anyone against it. Then as I started doing more research, it's like, well, what this piece is here, this department is, we're trying to create a queer agenda for Black history and say, hey, this person was gay, this person was gay, this person was gay, this person right here was gay, so therefore let's make Black history a gay movement. I am absolutely not in favor of that, and I think it's pathetic to even try that, because when we look at the civil rights era and the movement, Martin Luther King, I forget his guy's name, who was one of his most supportive members, organizers, he was a gay man. No one cared that he was gay. They didn't say, hey, because you're gay, we're going to put you with Dr. No, he was black. He was black first. What some people are trying to do is put gay before black, and I'm 1,000% not in favor of that. To me, you're hijacking a group of people who've already been marginalized for your own personal agenda, that you want everything to be okay. And to me personally, everything is not okay. I am a Christian. I am male. I'm heterosexual. I was born that way, or it's a choice. I don't know which one it was, but I just am. And I'm proud of it and I like it. I have students who are gay, whether it's by choice, by design. But I will say this, many students who I've spoken to and my adult friends who are gay, many of them said they were molested as a child. Many of them had situations that caused them to think differently or do things differently. I believe that we should let grown-ups love whoever the heck they want to love. It is not my business. I don't care, quite frankly. However, I believe there is an insidious agenda. When I look at freaking Cinderella, the king is a white man, the prince is a white man, but the freaking fairy godmother is a black man. What the hell? I'm not in favor of that. I'm not going to be in favor of that. So you can call me woke, sleep, anti-woke. I don't know. I have gay friends. I love them. I will protect and defend them. But I am not for certain agendas that the media, since you said the media is intentionally trying to promote the gay black man on every single thing. And quite frankly, I'm tired of it. I got gay friends. I'm not tired of them. I love them. They have a voice. I listen to them. We talk. They're not trying to usurp what they do in all of my life.
You bring up a great point, because I think, again, there seems to be a messaging center that sends out messages, wakes up the NPCs, wakes up the bots, and they all just start running in a direction of some sort, where I think at this stage of my life, I've reached the point where it's kind of like very similar perspective to you, frankly, in terms of just, this is what I am. I don't want all the drama. Why are we inserting all this drama? If you take, and this could be black or white, if you take a conservative group of people, you could call them a traditional group of people, and then you insert new, let's say, more left dogma, they're not going to like it. We're trying to convert everybody to something. That's not going to work without conflict.
It's absolutely not going to work without conflict. Same as the right. If you try to take us straight to the right, where we're going to turn back the hands of times and, hey, you're going back to slavery, it's not going to work without conflict.
I've never met a white person yet in America who says they want to turn back to slavery. In my limited time on this planet, I've not heard that one.
Sure. When I hear people say the South will rise again, to me, that's a little bit of a bell whistle. When was the South risen during the time of slavery? Unless they can explain that to me, what does that mean outside of my people being oppressed, suppressed, and depressed? I don't know what the South shall rise again mean.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know either. I've not used that phrase. I tend to think that's probably rebel-rousing guys. I can't imagine there's anybody, I've never heard it stated privately or publicly, white America is looking for the return of slavery. I've not heard that ever. Just to be frank. I don't know. We've covered a lot of stuff. And again, like I said, I hope that people enjoy the back and forth. We put a lot of stuff on the table today.
Listen, what I thought was going to be a conversation of police and community came about humanity. And I think that some people would probably think we didn't punch each other enough. We didn't kick the hell out of each other enough. But more intelligent people was like, hey, that was peaceful. I kind of like that. I kind of don't want to fight and argue and curse each other out. Let's find some common ground. We don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree to disagree. But I can leave you standing and respect you. You can leave me standing and respect me. And we're two men having intelligent conversation. That is rare. Doesn't happen every day. And I think people will want more of that.
You're a good conversation. I think you probably are even a better conversation when somebody like me pushes you some and you push me back. It's kind of how it goes. If you find an example after we finish, forward it to me. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or pat you on the back, but I've been a keen observer of politics for a long time. I once ran for political office when I was 21 years of age. I was slightly insane at that point in time, I guess.
What office did you run for?
ran for mayor of this community that I lived in outside DC. And I ran against a guy who was 72 years old. I was 21, he was 72.
What?
Yeah, my first media coverage. Actually, the first time I was 21 years of age. You're being thrown into local ABC, NBC, CBS affiliates and all that kind of stuff. The very first time at age 21, I saw media lie. Going back over 30 years, to see media create something lie, I was like, wow, if that could happen to me at 21 years of age back in 1990, anything's possible. Anything's possible.
That's interesting. You also learn, too, that politicians don't care about you. I was listening to one.
They don't care at all. They have one goal. And I think you and I agree with this. Politicians have one goal.
Stay in power.
To sit in that chair. That's their goal. Sit in that chair. They get off on the power.
I have to agree with that.
Yeah. That don't make a difference what color they are. That's all the same. That's universal. Great conversation. We should check in next year if you're game and have another one.
Absolutely. It was absolutely great talking to you, Mike. Very different than what I had expected. Very peaceful, and I do appreciate that.
What did you expect? Do you really think I was going to be a flamethrower? Is it going to be like Crossfire on CNN? Did you really think?
When I talked to my team, someone said, D, we got to get you these FBI crime stat reports because I think he's really going to hit you hard on the crime stats. Look at the Black community, drug sales, of this, of that, and the other. I did an interview in Houston, and these guys were so belligerent. It was like, guys, you just want ratings. You just want sensationalism. This is not about having intelligent conversation to solve problems. This is about stoking, fanning the flame, catering to your base, and saying we won. I want the nation to win. I don't have to win. I did not honestly know what to expect, but when I did my own research of you, I couldn't see that guy. It was like, this guy's way intelligent. He's way articulate. He is way on his stuff. I didn't see that. And when we first spoke in the beginning, I'm like, this is going to be great.
Look, nobody's happy about the statistics across all kinds of issues. For example, in the Black community, no one's happy about the statistics, and everyone can find the statistics. What do you do once you say the statistics? Is that the end of the conversation? It's important. It's important to know as a baseline, I guess, but then what do you do with it? I got to tell you one other thing, too. This is really interesting. Well, it's interesting to me. My book, Turtle Trader, for whatever reason, has been adopted by many in the Black community.
What's funny is many in the Black community have conservative values, and that's something that gets overlooked by the media.
Here's what's interesting. Somehow or another, it has been passed around, and this is actually in men and women's prisons in America. I've actually sent books. I think I sent a box of books to a women's prison. I think the part of the story that people like, what this Turtle Trader story was about, was a famous trader in Chicago. He made a lot of money, and he thought, I'm not very special. He goes, anyone can do what I can do. He put ads in the Wall Street Journal. He hired a bunch of trainees with no experience. He gave them his rules, set them out to trade. 4 years later, the group of 20 novices made $100 million profit, and this was in the 80s. I think a lot of people resonate with the idea of nurture trumping nature, the idea that I can learn my way out of something. I think that's one of the reasons that particular book resonates.
Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to order some with the young men in the juvenile justice system in Tennessee. I'll start having that conversation with them, and we'll read a couple chapters together, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Hey, invite me down to Memphis when I'm back in the country. I'm not in the country often, but I'd come down and have dinner with you.
Listen, absolutely. Memphis, Chicago, or Florida. And listen, I would love to get to Vietnam because I've only heard great things about it.
It's a very long conversation, but it is, let's put it this way. I've never had anybody say anything to me negative ever. Imagine that. Imagine the forgiveness of that.
Did you marry a woman there, which is why you went there? Why Vietnam? You have lots of places to go.
A bank in Hong Kong asked me to do a tour of Asia, 4-month speaking tour. It's going to be in all these Asian countries. And then I was like, I was single. And then I was like, well, I'm not leaving Asia. I made that decision. It was an easy decision. And then I was like, okay, where did I have the most fun? That was the easy decision too.
I am going to put that on my list of places to visit, understand the history, the culture. I would absolutely love to see and take tours and get a chance to meet some of the Vietnamese people. I think they're nice people.
Yeah. You'd have fun. Hey, Dwayne, is there a place you would like to send people to check you out, to see more what you're up to, and where can they go? Maybe even support in some way. Where can they go?
Sure. They could go to my website, DwayneBryant.com. Also, I have a YouTube channel where I have a lot of educational content. Dwayne Bryant, DWayne on YouTube. Those are, I would say, the two best ways. And the contact page, if they want to send me an email or talk more or find out more, they can see what I'm doing with the police and community, what I'm doing with the youth, and really trying to empower young people to make better decisions in order to be productive and powerful and positive individuals.
Good job. Nice chatting. Hopefully we'll do it again in the next year, perhaps.
Sounds like a great plan. I love it. Thank you.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.